Stop the war! Yeah! Good God, hear me sing. Don't put it off another day. Everybody singing. Stop the war! Oh! Nah, 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 nah. Don't put it off another day.
Welcome to KYWS Community Conversations. My name is Jameer, and I'm joined by Michael Ramirez, a local Native historian and cultural practitioner, and he's going to tell us a little bit about California history. Welcome.
Hetanani, Yankakan, Michael Ramirez, Nikki Hescom, Koyankawi Maidam, Wintun, Miwok, Yurak, Opa, Nichanan, Nick Bayi, Sacramento, California. So, hello, my name is Michael Ramirez, and that was a traditional greeting in my language. That's how I would introduce myself. That's how you would receive me for thousands of years. In my greeting, I explained that I am a KYWS, which is from this area here, Miwok, Yurak, Hupa, and Nisanan. My mother and father are both California native, so I am almost full-blooded California native, which is quite rare. And I finished by saying I am standing, my feet are planted here in Sacramento, California. And so I am honored to be here in the traditional land, the contested land of the Nisanan and the Miwok peoples. See, Sacramento, as it's been called now, is only about 150 years old, 170 years old, if I do the math. But this land, the practitioners of this land, the practices on this land go back tens of thousands of years. See, where we're at now actually should be underwater. The little bit of rain we had earlier in this month, the little bit of rain we've had so far, that is dismal. There should have been torrential rains, and in fact, this should all be underwater right now. The land will become visible during the spring and through the summer, and then it would be utilized by the Nisanan people, which are north of here, which would start at about Arden, maybe Auburn Boulevard. And then the Miwok villages would start in Elk Grove. And so this whole land would have been utilized by all the peoples in the surrounding area once it was visible. The main staple of this area was tule. The tule reeds that grow and amass all throughout the state. It needs water, and of course, like I said, this whole place would have been a swamp-like area, and so the tule would have thrived. We would have used the tule to make shoes, make clothing, make beds, make boats, make houses, make bags, make dolls for children, make duck decoys so that we could eventually harvest mallards. Now, when talking about California, when talking about Central California, what is now called California, when talking of the native peoples, it's important to recognize that the staple, the main substance of this Central Valley, all up and down the state, was acorn. In our traditional language, in the KYWS language, the Nisanan language, which are cousin languages, cousin tribes, we would call it uti, which is the traditional language, traditional word for acorn. See, acorn was 60 to 70% of the West Coast diet. You ate it every day for breakfast and dinner. Now, you never eat a raw acorn, never eat an acorn off the ground. They have, in fact, tannic acid regardless of when you harvest them. But if they're on the ground, they could already have a bug in it or potentially mold. And so we would have harvested them fresh green out of the tree and stored them for a year. So that food that we would have been eating right now would have been from last year. And the acorns that we would be harvesting right now would be for next year. That's food sovereignty and stability. And so the tannic acid would have been removed through a whole extensive process, a very, very long process that, in fact, took me 5 years to learn. And on the 6th year, I was allowed to do this by myself without any oversight. And so this land has been plentiful for thousands of years with the many resources, acorn being our main food staple, but salmon being our main protein. Now, see, today, salmon get the size of your arm. But back when my great-grandmother, who was born in 1895 and passed away in the year 2000 at the age of 105, when she was a child, salmon were the size of a 6-foot man. See, the water was so plentiful, the salmon were allowed to get that big. And in fact, Today, the Central Valley salmon do not die at their first spawning, which is completely irrational. See, salmon, all fish die after they're spawning. Central Valley salmon do not. And I contribute that to their, what I call their living capacity. See, they used to get so big, they stay small now, that they live 2 lives. And see, that endurance that the salmon encompass in that simple explanation is the same endurance that the native peoples of California, of what is now called America, have had to withstand themselves. And so I mention these food staples because it's important to recognize our connection to this land. It's important to recognize that this substance that we put into our bodies, these salmon, were enormous, were kings. And so the history of this state, which is now called California, is only 170 years old. But the history of this land goes back tens of thousands of years. And the many tribes of what is now called California. Because see, California has always held the distinction of the highest and most diverse native population. I believe there's 109 state designated tribes today. That's down from the original 210 at treaty signing. And see, here in California, we are a particular kind of natives. See, we are what's called landless Indians, for the most part. See, what you must understand about native peoples just across the United States is that there are 2 types of native peoples: federally recognized and non-federally recognized. See, let's unpack that for a second. No other peoples have to apply for identity. No other peoples have a legal blood quantum as decreed by the federal government. I do. See, in the United States today, there are legal blood quantums when speaking and selling of horses, natives, and this first came to terms when selling of natives. So today, there are still legal blood quantums quantified by the federal government for horses, natives, and dogs. And see, here in California, we are landless Indians because those 18 treaties which I spoke of were never ratified. See, they were sent back east to Washington, D.C. And so much like the foreign spending bills, any of these bills, until it's signed and stamped, it's not law. And so in California, lobbyists for the timber industry, the redwoods, the shipping, coast shipping, and the Sierra Nevada gold all lobbied the United States, paid the Senate to not ratify these treaties. And so they took those 18 treaties. They put them in a box. They tied a red ribbon around it, which was commonplace at the time, tie this red ribbon, which is where we get the term red tape. And they passed a law saying under the penalty of death, this red ribbon and box are not to be opened for 50 years. And so without treaties, which are nation-to-nation contract, we were denied identity, civil protection, land, and dignity. Because see, in 1850, without these treaties, with the United States informing the California state government that the treaties were not ratified, the California government, with their first governor, Peter Barnett, created the Vagrant Indian Act. And the Vagrant Indian Act made it legal to hunt, kill, and decapitate men, women, and children. Bring their heads to the state capitol, where you would be paid $5 for a man, $3 for a woman, $2 for a child's head, whole head to be collected. You would have been offered a badge, a bag, and told to come back soon. See, the history of California, people think, is surrounded by gold, but what they don't understand is that by the time the 3 million, yes, 3 million immigrants, big E, immigrants, arrived in California, most of the gold fields were already claimed by large corporations. And so you'd come to California looking for your own gold mine, but they'd all be taken over. And so you'd have to work in a gold field and make maybe $5 a week. Or you could help the United States clear its Indian problem and receive $5 for a man, $3 for a woman, $2 for a child. Now, see, the state with all those millions of immigrants here, European Americans, the hunt was on for these natives. And so many heads were brought into the state capitol that the state capitol then reached out to the federal government for reimbursement to, and I quote, do their job of clearing the Indians. And so the federal government agreed to reimburse the state, but they had to inspect and visually verify every head, because you could bring in a very robust child's head and say it was a man's head, or you could bring in a woman's head and say it was a man's head. The difference being $2 to $3, which was astronomical at the time. And so the state provided to the federal government every head that it was then reimbursed with. Millions of heads were collected between 1850 to 1920. Now, imagine this. For 70 years, there was an office at the state capitol where you could go in with one of my ancestors' heads, be graciously received, paid, and told to come back soon. There was oversight. There was government approval. There was a clerk working that counter. There was accountants going over all the money that was paid out, all the money coming in. There was government approval every year to keep this office open. This wasn't a hidden agenda. This wasn't a secret backroom thing. This was a part of the California economy. And so the history of this state is very bloody. There's the legal dualities of, are you a federally recognized, are you not a federally recognized? Because there is power in that federal recognition. See, I myself, being 15/16 California native, am not a federally recognized native. See, those 18 treaties, we never got those ratified. But that box was opened in 1905. In 1908, a lawyer attempted to get them ratified. He was told that the federal government in 1900 got out of the treaty business and now we're in the act business. And so this is where it gets interesting. So as of today, in order to become a federally recognized native person, first and foremost, it's a $250,000 application fee. Now, in 2024, $250,000 is a number that is not so erroneous, not so egregious. It is a big number, but it has been accomplished. But could you imagine in 1900 not even being a citizen? Oh, let's back that up. See, it wasn't until 1924 in the United States in general that Native peoples were considered citizens and or human. See, up until 1924, in order to leave your reservation, that's if you were a federally recognized Indian and you had federal land, you had your reservation, you couldn't leave that reservation without a permit, without an application. But vice versa, nobody could come onto your land. So in 1924, the Snyder Act was passed, which is sometimes referred to as the Citizenship Act. But what the Snyder Act was it allowed natives to walk freely throughout the United States like citizens, but not as citizens. See, each state had to indemnify its own native community. And so here in California, it wasn't until the 1930s that natives, the federally recognized natives, were ever given American citizenship. Now, because here in California, a lot of natives were not federally recognized, they were not classified as natives, so they were citizens upon birth. But they were, in my mother's case, identified as either white or black. She was definitely not black, so she is accredited as being white on her birth certificate. Now, 1905, 1908, the United States laid out the criteria. So $250,000 to apply. Once you get past that, you have to have 102 of your people. All 102 have to have a 51% or higher California native blood quantum as decreed by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Now, the Bureau of Indian Affairs has tracked every native ever born. So when people ask, how do I know if I'm Indian? You can check to the BIA. They have ancestries going back to the beginning of the United States. They have history of California, at least the records I have from them, start in 1840. California wasn't a part of the United States till 1846. 1850, it became its own state. But they have records going back to 1840. And so through their records, they have the amount of native that you legally have to have. 2 of those 102 have to have never left your ancestral homeland. Those 102 all have to be a lineal descendant of a treaty signer. So let me explain that a little bit better. Even though these treaties were never ratified, they count. They're stored, they're known. In order to apply to become federally recognized, you have to be a descendant of the person who signed. So imagine 3 brothers, let's make it better, 2 brothers and a sister going to this treaty signing. The oldest, speaking for the family as is protocol, signs on behalf of the family, behalf of the tribe even. His children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, everyone descended straight from him, count in 102. The brother and sister, their children, their grandchildren, their descendants, don't. And then you have to prove your tribe was terminated either in 1850 with the treaty signings, 1864, 1884, 1896, 1905, 1910, 1924, because when the Snyder Act was passed, there was also laws to, once the natives were identified, the state then terminated their responsibility. 1936, 1945. And so you have one chance to do this, because if you fail, you can't come back for almost 80 years between applications. Good luck on not breeding yourselves out. And so these hoops that you have to jump through, several tribes have done this. As you know about the casinos, some tribes are recognized. It has happened. Now, for my story, my people, I will never have that ability, even though I'm 15/16 California native, almost full blood. With my village, it is no longer visible. See, where we were originally rousted out from was what is now Lake Oroville. Underneath Lake Oroville is my ancestral village. In fact, 5-10 years ago, when there was a severe drought, I actually went up and saw what I believe to be the tops of our ancestral village houses under mud. And they're not visible now, but from 170 years of, or I think 1880s, so about 100 years of mud sediment on top of my ancestral village. And so I'll never be able to apply, because once we were moved out of there, the Concal Mighty, the southern fork of the river, Feather River people, that's where my village was. We were moved to the small government plot.
Welcome to KYWS. My name is Jameer, and this is part 2 of a community conversation with Michael Ramirez, a local native historian and cultural practitioner.
With my village, it is no longer visible. See, where we were originally rousted out from was what is now Lake Oroville. Underneath Lake Oroville is my ancestral village. In fact, 5-10 years ago, when there was a severe drought, I actually went up and saw what I believe to be the tops of our ancestral village houses under mud. They're not visible now, but from 170 years of, or I think 1880s, so about 100 years of mud sediment on top of my ancestral village. And so I'll never be able to apply, because once we were moved out of there, the Concal Mighty, the southern fork of the river, Feather River people, that's where my village was. We were moved to the small government plot. Well, okay, so all the villages in that, what is now Lake Oroville, many, but not all, of the people got out. They were rounded up in Chico and marched over to Round Valley, hundreds of miles away. It's called the Nome Colt Walk. Those, many of them being my family, my village, broke off immediately. And so when they came back, I don't know the exact details, but they were then rounded up and put onto what is referred to in history as the Strawberry Valley Reservation. Strawberry Valley Reservation holds the record for the second smallest land per capita. About 300 men and women and children, 300, not even complete families, were put onto, I believe, a 1/4 acre of land to share, all 300 of them, and their descendants. That was in around 1900. It then disappeared, of course, went away in 1905 when tribes were terminated again. And so that is my story. And I'm sure there are many out there who have stories much like mine, many who have no idea that they have stories like mine, because they, being displaced, being moved, now are told that they're Mexican, that they are Latino, because they claim the last name Ramirez. Well, I have a last name Ramirez, but that comes from my Miwok ancestor, who I never really got to know, don't know much about. But what I do know was he was given the last name Ramirez as a slave name when he was purchased by the Ramirez Ranch in Marysville, California. Now, if you ever go up to Marysville, you'll see the Ramirez Road leads to the Ramirez Ranch. There's Ramirez Towing. It's a big farm, it's a big family. That's where I get my name from. I have a slave name that I carry today. See, besides the natives, the millions that were hunted, killed, and decapitated, the rest were forced into servitude. See, the first law that I spoke of, I don't know how long ago, the Vagrant Indian Act, besides allotting money and the legal ability to hunt, kill natives, it also stated that if you purchased, if you paid a native's bail, you now own them. And of course, if a native was in a white city, they were to be arrested for vagrancy. Funny how that vagrancy thing keeps coming back up when you want to get people who have been here, who are here, out of here. That vagrancy keeps coming up. And so thousands of natives were arrested and purchased. Thousands of children were gathered at gunpoint, forcibly taken to these boarding schools. We would call them concentration camps or re-education camps. Now I say that because in fact, the fascist idea for a concentration camp comes from the United States treatment of the native peoples and reservations. The iconic Jewish tattoo roll number comes from the Native American roll numbers. There is a gas camp, I believe Lundkirk is what it was referred to as. It literally had the same floor plans as one of the California missions. I mean, if you go down the adobe walls and put up barbed wire, you'd have Auschwitz. You'd have all the other concentration camps. This is a history that has regurgitated itself many times. But to understand the history of how it started here with Native Americans is to understand how these colonial tactics have been reused time and time and time again. See, I'm here today, a Humboldt State graduate, because the generations before me sacrificed physically, mentally, emotionally, so that I could be here today. And to understand how I got here is vital to understand why it's so important that I go forward and what I carry with me going forward. See, this is just my story, my family's history, but this is a portion of the history of California. And in fact, my great-grandmother, she, in 1998, her name is Bertha Nye Norton. In 1998, she was named one of the founding mothers of Sacramento, the native grandmother of California, and then after she was gone, one of the 13 grandmothers of the world. And so to understand my place, not just as a native, not just as a person here today, but as a descendant, a living example of indomitable people, of a woman who was so important in her life that she is a part of the history of the state. But to understand that her father, his grandmother, all go back thousands of years, and their actions have been what has allowed for the thousands of people to arrive here and overtake these amounts of resources that are only abundant here in California, which has made California these huge economic place. I believe it's the third or fourth economy in the world. You can only imagine the abundance of resources pre-contact. And so you can only imagine how many hands it took to maintain all the resources that used to be here. See, besides the natives disappearing in mass, there was a flat-faced bear. When the Spanish first arrived, one of the first things they immediately annihilated was the California camel. The red fox, the gray coyote, very tricky little creatures, very pesky creatures, wiped out. Furs sold. Otters and beavers, there's still some around, but not like they used to be. And of course, the salmon. You know, they're trying to reintroduce the brown salmon or the brown trout back to California because it was exported out in mass to New Zealand. And it's propagated in New Zealand. It's from California. I'm grateful to be able to know how I got here, why I'm here today, why I find the importance of telling this history, because it is hidden. I had to go to college to hear the history of my people, to read books about my family. This should be a part of the known history of this state because it is a part of this state. You know, when I was a child, I was taught, you learn from your history or you're doomed to repeat it. And so it amazes me that we have no idea the history of this state. And it becomes very, very clear that it was purposeful not to tell this story, but also that purposeful neglecting of this history, the neglecting of the traditional native practices has had a detrimental effect on our resources. Like I said, we should be flooding right now. There should have been raining which should have been raining for a month now. There should be massive amounts of things growing right now. Acorns should be everywhere. Everyone should be gathering acorns, but we're not. There's no rain. The fire seasons have extended. There's literally someplace, I can't think of it, I think it's like in Nevada, that is literally being rained on while they're fighting a fire because the winds are so strong, because it's so dry. I can't even imagine how that's even physically, theoretically possible, but yet it is. This is the world we live in now. You know, we should have big, just blocks of fog. When I was a child, there was fog here. I can't remember the last time I saw fog. Sparse, if any. There should be so much water flowing through here. There should be so many things growing right now. There should be a massive amount of ducks flying around right now. There should be so many different things, but there's not. But what there is are people like me and you out there listening who give a damn. And so I'm honored to come and tell my portion of California history, to tell my family's history, because it's damned important. But I want to leave off with the request, the wish, the plea to everyone out there listening. Find your history. Recognize the struggles to how your family got here, and maybe recognize some of the struggles your family brought on, because I can tell you that there are stories of my people being a problem. Today we would call them revolutionaries, or maybe Contra. But they were not beneficial. I mean, who's to say that, you know, in fighting, something might have got caught on fire that wasn't supposed to, or, you know, people survived. And so you'll find the amazing things that your family participated in. You'll find some family secrets, but it's all a part of how we got here. And until we recognize that full history, we will never understand where we messed up. So take your time with digesting the little bit of history I've given you. Research through the that you can. You know, Vine Deloriate Jr., Jack Norton Sr., Hurtado are great authors. You can definitely read some of their books. They wrote some amazing things. You'll recognize some of the things I said that are quoted from them. And so I'm hoping that some of the history that I'm telling now will affect the next coming decisions that we all are taking, to recognize that our small actions could have major benefits, major consequences. But regardless of whether we acknowledge our decisions, we are going forward. We are in the modern. We are here together. And it's us that are going to save each other. And it is the lack of us which will eradicate us. I'll leave off on one of my favorite quotes was from John Trudell. He said that it was arrogant to think that we could destroy the earth. The earth was here before us. The earth is after us. The earth will live after us. It'll wipe us out and go on. So what we're doing now is not destroying the earth. We're destroying our capability, our capacity to survive. And until we recognize that, we will not be beneficial. So thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for this time to come and share this history, to let me babble on like I can, but to share my family story and to bring to light the history of many families, native peoples, of names you probably don't know, but have interacted with your family, have interacted with the state. So take the time to get to know yourself, get to know your family, and to thank thank your relatives, older relatives, because they had to go through a lot harder stuff than we're going through today. So thank you for this time.
Thank you. On behalf of KYWS, West Sacramento, LP, we thank you, and we look forward to hearing from you again and continuing this conversation, because it sounds like you have a lot more to share, and this is a great beginning, and we appreciate it again.
Well, thank you.